We're obviously a company called Ingenious. Howard sitting here in the background for a little bit of moral support. This is the first ever webinar we've done, so it might be a little bit unpolished. Ingenious has been in business for 22 odd years, and we kind of look after all small businesses' technology needs. They're called MSPs, but not a lot of people know what that means. This presentation is a bit skewed towards AEC, architects, engineering, construction, but it also applies to all companies with these particular needs, really. I think we have about a third of the companies in here are AEC, a third financial/investment companies, and some travel property and intellectual property people here too. Please use the Q&A at any time throughout the presentation. So, any company with large storage requirements will have the same issue. How do you embrace the cloud with fast access to large files? We're going to give you the options, the pros and cons and costs, and possibly a solution, but it's kind of up to you. Hopefully this will lay out your choices in a way that will help you make a decision. Of course, this isn't heavily tailored to your individual needs. We've made some assumptions, but I'll come back to that. The main problem here is we've got exponentially increasing storage, and how do you deal with people working remotely from your data? Why is this a problem? Well, remote access is slow, and how is this done? VPN, remote access to machines, or other cumbersome solutions, is that how it's done? Project management is next to impossible, and email communication complicates things further. The pain points are that it's slow, unreliable, it's hard to manage, your data is scattered to the winds. There's also staff annoyance and knock-on effects on morale, company image, and client perception. I've kind of got an illustration of the past, present, and future. In the past, we would typically be working on workstation server environments, technology-centric. I'll touch on that a bit. We've been talking about information technology for 30 years. We've been heavily focusing on technology, kind of constrained by this. Now we're pretty much focusing on the information side and ignoring technology. It doesn't matter what you consume your data on. And file and document lifecycle management and versioning was not really possible historically. Your email was in a mail server, and I'm going to use a little pointy thing here, hold on. Email was in a local file server, so were your files, and finance accounts typically stored their data there too. Any line of business apps for Revit, InDesign, Photoshop, or anything else, even for video files and so on, were accessing data on a local file server too. Shared projects, there were email versions all over the place in multiple mailboxes distributed throughout the company. Present is probably maybe some Microsoft 365 and scattered data, still technology centric. PC, Macs, tablets and phones now, as well as servers. You've probably got your mail in Microsoft 365, possibly files still on a local file server, finance and accounts still doing that, a line of business apps doing the same, but sharing stuff, or you may well have moved to Dropbox or other horribly insecure file sharing solutions. The future, so I forgot to use my pointer, fully collaborative working. Now you're information centric. I was talking about information technology. Now it's the information side of IT. You don't care as long as you can access the data. No servers. Email is in Microsoft 365. Files are in the cloud. Your finance and accounts, Zero or some other solution. But this is what we're kind of looking for, on central copy, on kind of central source of truth with versioning, approval, and history. Trying to illustrate this graphically. On the left-hand side, we've got kind of workstation server. Obviously, on the local LAN, communication was fast over a local network, but remote access was dependent on the up and download speeds of the home person's link and the one into the office. And data would be passing between all these remote people, and the remote users suffer, but typically nice and fast locally. The kind of where we may be now is we've got all sorts of machines accessing data, and possibly data scattered throughout WeTransfer box, also email systems. We've got file sync and copies everywhere. And then the situation just compounds with multiple file copies all over the place, which is the real one. And just distributed and duplicated. The End result should be that we're working from one central copy. So when anything is worked on from the central source of truth. And also emails no longer contain attachments. Links to this file are, the email will reference the file. So you're not attaching files within emails. And you don't have this problem with multiple copies distributed all over the place. The thing that really turns into is you don't really care about the machines, it's people. How are they accessing the data? So we've got kind of 6 headings here. You'll notice the one on the right is pretty much skewed towards architects, AEC firms, but it can apply to other third-party products specific to your industry. And we pretty much put them in ascending costs from left to right. The first option, of course, is store all your data in Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive. It's kind of all the same thing and interwoven, and sync all your files to OneDrive with OneDrive to all machines. Another kind of cheap and slightly less restrictive solution is to drop all your data into a mapped Azure file share, but this is to a remote resource. So it's a kind of a drive mapping to a drive as a data share in the cloud. You can also go for servers still, but we're of the opinion that a slightly dated method. Middle solution, data platform, store your data on a sophisticated cloud collaboration and governance storage platform. And then we move to the right to more expensive options such as cloud servers, virtual desktops, and then these third-party proprietary services that can be restrictive. This next slide is pretty complicated. I'm going to probably try and zoom in on elements to make this easy to read. I'm going to go through it, but hopefully quickly. It's worth noting that the only solutions here that really can deal with collaborative data sharing and compliance are really Microsoft 365, the data platform, and the third-party services. These solutions are very hard to share stuff externally, third parties, suppliers, projects, so on. We're also slightly of the opinion that once the left are too limiting and once the right are complex and incomplete or horribly expensive. But I mean, obviously you can see we've got a lot of pros in the middle, but I'll deal with them each in turn. So hopefully this zooms in on Microsoft 365. It's cheap. You probably have it already on your current plan. You are dealing with locally synced files and they're very fast to access. You're sharing for external users or projects as possible. Data can be accessed in a single pane of glass, i.e. Microsoft Teams or SharePoint if you're using it. And there's file versioning and rollback. The cons are file sync with issues of clashes. They won't work with some applications. I'm using AEC examples here, such as full Revit. That's collaborative Revit. Sage doesn't like it either. And there are other applications, namely the ones where multiple people need to work on one file because the application demands it. You've got file path limitations, 255 characters, and the number of files cannot go over 300,000. Also, your storage is limited to 1 terabyte. You get 10 gigabytes extra per person in your company. Next choice, Azure Files. It's cheap online storage. These are pros, by the way, of course. It behaves like a file share to a mapped drive, larger storage than 365, and it's attractive for those with very limited budgets, but there are caveats. The file and path limitations are still 255 characters. The number of files cannot go over 200,000. Storage is limited to 5 terabytes. Performance is limited. Danger of high extra cost for moving large amounts of data in and out, and you won't see those for a month or so. And Microsoft will not give you a credit if you've done something by mistake. It can get very expensive. Sharing for external users projects is not possible, and there's no file versioning and rollback. Servers, well, we're familiar. They're a well-established way of doing things. Data is local to the users, but remote users suffer, needs fast local internet, ingress and egress, large capital outlay. Sharing is not possible again. All your eggs are in one basket. Server problems and failures do occur. You need some form of expensive business continuity solution on top of this, really. Again, file versioning rollback, can be configured. It needs large amounts of extra storage. and you really need a VPN for all your remote users. Data platform, very feature-rich file storage platform, sharing and collaboration lifecycle, that data controls, privacy and compliance, access governance, and threat management. It's a sophisticated local caching mechanism for very fast data access. It's not really a sync as such, but it kind of is. Multiple ways of accessing data and applications that cannot work with file sync can be used. Automatic data archiving, huge paths and file storage. It has ransomware and virus and malware protection built in, and you can do file versioning and rollback. The cons are there's an admin overhead and setup needed. You will need Azure servers and a VPN, and this is for working in collaborative Revit, or anything else that was that type of application I mentioned that needs full multiple people to access the same file. And we move on to servers in the cloud, virtual servers. Near 100% uptime is guaranteed. Easy management, heavily scalable and flexible, simple backup and other DR operations. You need secure remote. It doesn't have to be VPN, but methods of reaching the servers. Backups are needed. And of course, with all the solutions, actually, except the middle one, you need ransomware and other virus or malware protection. We're then into virtual desktops, and actually virtual desktops is a little bit different to all the other solutions because this concentrates on the desktop side of things, not really the data side. So great thing about virtual desktops is your data is ring-fenced, highly flexible and scalable, and can be heavily restricted and controlled. It's very expensive though. All processing and memory and graphics is remote, so very high-powered VDOs, virtual desktops are needed that are not as good as the local machine. All access is via remote desktop services that is limiting. The remote graphics rendering to local device can be clunky, and offline access is not possible, but you still need servers or another storage solution. This is a desktop solution. All others are data. So you would want to use a virtual desktop probably in conjunction with something else, such as Microsoft 365 or any of these other solutions. Now we're into more kind of specific to AEC, but this does apply, as I mentioned, to other sort of applications that, such as Adobe, I know, is trying to move people heavily into cloud storage. They're all designed to be a one-stop solution for managing project lifecycle, but you need to justify the costs. They're very powerful, designed for and satisfy a very specific requirement. Pros are extremely expensive. Some still need servers, and you're locked into proprietary software. It's very hard and expensive to break out. It means you never do. Not only expensive, but time-consuming and heavily disruptive. If you put all your data into some of these solutions, you're there, and getting out is hard. You're 100% reliant on the solution, i.e. you may need to be damn sure that their platform is stable, and you probably still need some Microsoft 365 or other back-end Office systems. So I think the next slide, we're on to security concerns. With Microsoft 365, it's hard to contain and restrict access to data. It's almost impossible to get an overview of what's been shared externally and or internally. Data gets scattered over sync devices. Third-party backup is needed. Azure Files, which is attractive at first impressions, but there's no user authentication to the data. It's done by blanket drive mapping. This really is a fairly major concern. You've got to back it up. You don't really want to back it up within Microsoft systems either. You want it somewhere else. Ransomware mentioned. Hardware servers, local and offsite backups are needed. Ransomware or other virus malware protection is needed. Data platform, yeah, there's an admin overhead. There's a bit of setup needed. If you want to collaboratively work in Revit and other applications that need it, you need one small Azure server and a VPN to remote access it. Cloud servers, security, yeah, the VPN, or there are other methods. Backups are needed, and yeah, ransomware protection is needed as well. Virtual desktops, arguably the most secure because your data is ring-fenced, but in reality, it's very hard to fully lock data down. People will cheat it. They'll cheat the environment out of frustration. They'll copy stuff out of it or email it to themselves. Again, ransomware, virus, malware protection. Third-party services, data access needs to be planned, set up correctly and properly managed. Ransomware, again, But data security and backups, do they have redundant storage? Is this backed up? How well are they actually looking after your data? This is the cost implications. Now, I've had to make some assumptions. Let me just zoom in here. If you can see this bit here, we're assuming an office of 25 people and 4 terabytes of data. And I'm going to zoom back out again. So all of these have one thing in common. There are migration costs to move your data into all of this. That's kind of a given. And that's the top element of this summary down here as well. So I won't dwell on that. We've got monthly, what's the word I was going to say, prescriptions, monthly licensing for Microsoft 365. Every extra 100 gigabytes of data is 18 quid, lost time and clunky working methods due to your staff not working efficiently. There is this caveat down here. Lost time has hidden staffing productivity costs that are hard to measure or quantify. Clunky working methods can result in extra costs and/or staff members needed. So we've got a total, well, we've got migration costs, but possibly no extra cost on existing subscriptions. Azure files, yeah, mentioned that already, typically 30 to 60 pounds per terabyte of data. You see why it's so incredibly attractive. But speed of your data access is an issue, and we've got this lost time, clunky working methods as well. Migration costs, but typically only 120 to 240 pounds a month, assuming 25 people and 4 terabytes of data again. Hardware, server hardware and licensing, operating system. We charge £89 a server support. You're going to have roughly double your data, £65 per terabyte, times 2 to go back historically for offsite backup and storage. £3 signs, because server location cooling has a cost, whether it's office space or a rack in a data center or somewhere, and need some form of remote access solution. Lost productivity for remote users. Additional machines are needed for remote users. How do you manage that? Yeah, this £double sign for business continuity solution. You've got to have some form of method of running if your server's dead and needs to be restored, or you need to buy a new one, or it's been stolen if you had a fire or something. Again, lost time, clunky working methods. Migration costs are the same across 2 servers, roughly 15,000. I mean, let's give or take. If you divide that by 3 to 5 years, 36 to 60 months, it's equivalent to 250, 450 pounds a month. If you're going to do it that way, if you had finance, it would be more. £700 a month includes these support costs and backup costs. And I've done the £3 signs and £2 signs and £2 signs for these unknowns: cooling, remote access, and business continuity. Arguably, we could shift this one to the right, actually, in terms of costs. Depends on the size of your business. Business continuity is really important, of course. How are you going to run if whatever you're accessing is not accessible? I'll move on to the data platform. Again, that's in common. $35 a person a month is one of the plans that you can have. Gives you 100 gigabytes of data. If you're archiving stuff off of cheaper storage, then that's only £35 a terabyte. Sorry, $35 a terabyte, I think. Roughly, if you need this full collaborative Revit or other forms of access to that kind of data, roughly £200. It's probably, to be honest, it's probably near 300, and £80, £9 per server support. I put this down as a kind of negative cost. It's a saving. We're of the opinion that the way you change your working methods and your workflow, this will give you significant savings in productivity and collaborative working. It's possible to completely overhaul internal processes and external interaction with your clients and suppliers, completely working in a very different way. Roughly, again, 25 people, 4 terabytes of data, £1,200 a month. Now we're into cloud servers, again, migration, roughly £500 for a couple of Azure servers, roughly £40 to £75 per terabyte of data. Support for the servers, VPN, remote access, again, lost time, clunking working methods. Migration costs plus roughly £1,300 a month. Virtual desktops, high setup costs for virtual desktops on top of migration, of course, they range considerably in price. £150 to £200 per person per month. you still got to put your data somewhere. Where are you going to put your data? So, you could have these costs or any of these others really, or even these in conjunction with virtual desktops. You need to pay for extra support for that environment. Again, how would you, not necessarily VPN, but you do need to gain some form of secure remote access to it. And you're going to need secondary PCs, Macs, or devices or tablets to access this data. Migration cost plus roughly £5,000 to £6,500 a month for 25 people and 4 terabytes data. In fact, it doesn't even include the data that. So, third-party services. Now we're into kind of a whole different league. They usually charge heavily for for setup and training costs. Collaborate Pro, for example, from Autodesk is £138 a month. So it's pretty costly. Newformer is £400 a person a year. Some of them need servers. Newformer needs servers. And of course, then you've got to think about the service headings again. There's considerable end user training needed for the proprietary solution and considerable change in working methods. So we've got migration costs, could be £15,000 capital outlay for a couple of servers, £1,300 a month if they're cloud servers that you choose. And licensing could be anything between £1,000 and £3,500 a month, or maybe other solutions could be even more. The third-party costs obviously require more analysis. There are various variables here. Our opinion, not viable for companies with large Microsoft 365. This is not really viable for companies with large data storage needs. File sync is horribly clunky, with versioning being a problem and clashing multiple copies being not overwriting, but you have to decide which is the right one to save. Is certainly not fit for full Revit, collaborative Revit, and other applications that cannot use synced files. Azure Files is very restrictive, horrible to manage. Any data of any volume, securities or worries now, as well as performance. It's not a collaborative solution by a long shot. There's a danger of Hive charges for user data ingress and egress. Hardware services, they're a thing of the past, really. They're to be avoided. All your eggs in one basket, heavy risks of downtime, high capital outlay. Where will they go in costs? Remote access is a problem. It's not a collaborative solution. As you can tell, we're skewing towards the data platform. Good balance. And obviously, the further you go to the right, actually, the better, but it becomes harder to justify the costs. It's a good balance of costs versus gains in productivity and collaborative working. It's far more affordable than solutions to the right. Bear in mind how much a few minutes of your employees' time costs a month. And here's on our insights page, we've got an employee cost calculator, and this is an illustration of 25 people being paid £40,000 a year average, 5,000 overhead each, 25 employees, pension and employers NI. You're spending 1.2 million on employee costs a month, and 10 minutes of their time a day is easily lost. 20 lots of half a minute, 10 lots of 1 minute, 5 lots of 2 minutes, easily, probably double that or triple it. That's 28,000 a year, or over 5 years, £140,000. You can go to our website and change these numbers up and down and play with it. It's quite an eye-opener. Servers in the cloud, high storage and backup costs in Azure for large data volumes. It's not a collaborative solution. Remote access needed. It's not as flexible as a data platform and nowhere near as feature-rich. Virtual desktops, we think just very expensive, somewhat restrictive. Bear in mind remote desktop limitations and performance, not a collaborative solution. A whole other environment that needs support and maintenance. Same comments on employee time costs per month. And our solution to the right, well, possibly the Rolls-Royce, but extremely expensive. It's not really an option in our opinion. Because of this, it's really hard to, I think, justify that no matter what size you are. There's a little bit of an addendum here I've put in here. Email's really hard. It's really difficult to keep a track on and gets lost in people's inboxes. Project lifecycle is really challenging with multiple file copies. So really the way to go is emailing a link to a file at a moment in time. So we can do a link to a file at a moment in time, and it can change from that point forward. That's the way to go, but it's all important, but also it's important to keep a track of all the correspondence. So we can do automatic filing based on subject, content, attachment to your cloud storage. So it goes into a correspondence folder alongside all your project data. Can be used for project information gathering, i.e. you go on site and collect photos and email them in. Typically, this is the price per month. The other thing with emails, what happens when people leave? Which mailbox was it in? What do you do with that mailbox? You archive it, delete it? The file lifecycle management is almost impossible. So ultimately, the solution is to file any correspondence automatically. So, any questions? Feel free to pick up brains. If you're feeling shy, obviously feel free to email me. My email address is down the bottom. That's our website. That's my direct dial. I'm going to follow up with an email afterwards, by the way. Would you like a demo or trial account on the platform? Any other business or IT solutions we can help with? Happy to give any feedback on many other things. Yeah, by the way, feel free to pop into the quick Q&A if you do. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Howard?
No, I've pretty much covered all of it. I mean, it might be worth having separate conversations as to why we think the data platform is the preferred option. But there's only so much you can cover in half an hour. Yeah. I mean, you've pretty much shown we've gone through every option we can think of, and we've honed in on what we think is the best one, the one that's going to suit most people. Yeah, moving to replacing your existing servers with a new service is not the way to go moving forward. And if you're embracing the cloud, what's that going to look like? And yeah, this is what we think it should look like. So give us a shout if you want to talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. It's been great. This is our first one. Hopefully it wasn't next time. I think I'll do that video in a different way so we can hear it, because it worked when I did the dry run.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks very much. All the best.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.